This is the cytoskeleton introduction. So the cytoskeleton is an important part of all animal cells and all eukaryotic cells. It's especially important for animal cells because they don't have a cell wall. This means that the cytoskeleton instead is responsible for holding the three-dimensional space of the cell. The cytoskeleton is a really beautiful structure, and you can see through this image that there's several different components of the cytoskeleton which are stained fluorescently, and we're going to talk about those three different components today. So let's take a couple notes. Alright, so we've got the cytoskeleton, which is a network of filamentous proteins that extend through the cytoplasm. The cytoskeleton is responsible for several different functions, one of which is to organize intracellular components, like organelles, and it also enables the cell to adopt a variety of shapes. And as I mentioned previously, the role of support is also fulfilled by the cytoskeleton, like an architectural three-dimensional support, instead of a big flat squashed bag of cell goo. This holds up the three-dimensional space. And finally, the cytoskeleton enables motility for cells, which we'll hear quite a bit more about later. One of the most important things to know about the cytoskeleton is, much like other parts of the cell, that it's highly dynamic. Things are constantly moving through the cell, and the cytoskeleton is constantly being remodeled as well. So basically we call this structure highly dynamic. And there's some really interesting regulation into how the cytoskeleton components are built up as well as disassembled. Overall, though, the cytoskeleton is often compared to the bones of the cell, like the skeleton of our body holds up the three-dimensional space. But what's different about the cytoskeleton is it also is the muscles. In other words, it's responsible for movement of the cell. And basically, this is made up of, the cytoskeleton is made up of three different sorts of filaments. Again, they're all protein. And we're going to hear about each of those. The first one that we'll talk about is the intermediate filaments, or IF. They are intermediate in size. That's where their name comes from. Secondly, second type of microfilament is the microtubules. And the third type is actin filaments. So we can see some of these components in this awesome picture over yonder. And I just love pretty pictures, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. I don't have all of the colors in this app, but I will hit the ones I can. So basically in red, that is actin in the image above, figure 17-1. In blue is DNA. And then I don't have a green pen, which makes me a bit sad, but you'll have to work with me to consider that the microtubules, those are in green. And again, these are all fluorescently labeled. So we've got the nucleus of the cell here, which is obviously has lots of DNA. You can see the microtubules are extending in lots of different areas. Each of these little squiggles is a long filamentous protein, which is made up of many subunits. Again, those are the microtubules kind of emanating throughout the cytoplasm. Most of the time they're going to stay more in the immediate portion, kind of the central portion of the cytoplasm. And then actin is typically found more around the edges and extending into any ruffling along the very extreme portions of the cell. You can also see there's some yellow stuff going on in this picture, and this is to highlight any overlap. Something that's weird about fluorescence is that when you have an overlap of red and green, that appears as yellow. This is in the land of fluorescence. Just kind of FYI as we look at these structures. So we're going to talk about each of the three components of the cytoskeleton now in more detail. The first one is to talk about intermediate filaments, which are shown in this image in blue. So intermediate filaments, these are rope-like fibers. They're about 10 nanometers in width. And their claim to fame is that they have great strength. Oh, sorry about that. So we call that great tensile strength. They're actually more durable than the other components of the cytoskeleton through experimental manipulation. They are also flexible. And again, location matters. And the intermediate filaments are found as an extended network through the cytosol. Their other location is that they are underneath the nuclear membrane, which is a location called the nuclear lamina. So you can see this on the image over to the left. So here we've got our one location. Here we've got our cell. This looks like an epithelial cell. Like in the intestinal tract, we've got the long extensions up here. This is the nucleus. They're showing in brown. And you can see this tight circle of blue that is highlighting the intermediate filaments in the nuclear lamina. Again, that's inside the nucleus. And then there are also intermediate filaments which move throughout, are present throughout the cytoplasm. Let's next talk about the microtubules. These are 25 nanometers in diameter, and they are hollow cylinders made up of tubulin protein subunits. These are pretty rigid and they're responsible for the movement of organelles. Also, they are responsible for chromosomal segregation during cell division, like mitosis and meiosis. Microtubules make up a large portion of the cilia and flagella, which are responsible for movement. They're extensions on the cell. And they can provide cell polarity, so that one side of the cell is different from the other. Microtubules are found throughout the cytosol. And they originate, kind of emanate, from a core location, which is called the microtubule organizing center, or MTOC. So microtubule organizing center. And that would be this little light green area. Kind of looks like a spider, like part of the spider's body or something. But that is the microtubule organizing center. And then we see the microtubules in their long filamentous form extending from that area. If we take a look at the microtubule structure down below here, this is an electron micrograph showing us a pretty grainy picture of long microtubules. But basically you can see down here in the schematic that there are dark green and light green components of the microtubules. Each of these are tubulin proteins. Every single one of these circles is one polypeptide, which takes on its own form. And then, as we've talked about before in lecture, the way that we call some structures in the cell, we still call this a microtubule protein, this whole shenanigan here, but really it's made up of many individual protein subunits. And you can see they're put together in a very specific order, which we will talk about later. The last part of the cytoskeleton to discuss is the actin filaments. These are 7 nanometers in diameter, and they are concentrated in the cell cortex, as I mentioned earlier, so along the kind of edge of the cell. Actin is made up of helical polymers of the globular protein actin. And if we look over here on this image, each of these little red dots is a individual actin polypeptide chain folded into its proper shape. And then you can kind of see there's 2 strands along here, and so they zigzag along one another. And again, these are all made up of the same protein subunit repeated over and over and over again. Actin filaments are useful for organelle motility. Even though it looks like they just kind of sit in the cell like a little bean, they actually are quite dynamic. Actin is also responsible for cell motility and some aspects of cell shape as well. So that wraps up the first portion of our introduction to the cytoskeleton.